千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Okay, so what is 19 about? Let's read through it first. And sagacity, abandon knowledge. The people benefit 100 times. And benevolence, abandon righteousness. The people return to piety and charity. And cunning, discard profit. Bandits and thieves no longer exist. These three things are superficial and insufficient. Thus, this teaching has its place. Show plainness, hold simplicity, reduce selfishness, decrease desires. Now that's 19. And we're gonna dig into the meaning of these lines in just a moment. First, we want to take a look at the different sections to see if we can divide it up. So what I'll do first is I want to draw everyone's attention to the repeating characters. So looking at this right here, now remember, a lot of times in the Tao Te Ching, it can follow a structure like ABAB, a repeating structure of 2 lines. So if you look at that here, you can see that's true. Let me highlight those characters for you so you can see it more clearly. So take a look at lines 1, 3, and 5. And even though you don't know the Chinese characters, that's okay. Look for similarity pictorially, visually. You'll see the first character of 1, 3, and 5 are the same. Not only that, but the third character of 1, 3, and 5 are also the same. So referencing the translation just to the right, you can see that the first character has been translated as end, to stop something, to end something. And then the third character is translated as abandon in line 3 here, and then discard in line 5 here. But discard, abandon, pretty much synonymous in this context. So you can see that here we have 1, 2, A, B, A, B, A, B from 1 down to 6. And that means we can put a line between the 2 sections. Section 1 being 1 to 6, section 2 will be the rest, 7 to 10. And indeed, starting in section 2, it talks about these 3 things. And we know what the 3 things are. They are represented in the 6 lines, divided by 2 lines each for 3 items. So indeed, we can talk about the 3 things. We can show the 3 things as subdivisions as well. A smaller division within the major division, like this. So I think that's pretty easy to follow. And you can also point to 7, 8, 9, 10, and then have you can also have a subdivision to get 7 and 8 together in one section, and then 9 and 10 would then be the last section. So I'm just going to leave that as an exercise for everyone. We're pretty much ready to delve into the text line by line. So let's do that. Quite a bit for us to talk about today. A lot of meaning embedded in these simple lines. Let's dive right in. Not waste any time at all. Let's take a look at the first two characters in this chapter. So specifically isolating the first character, that's 绝. So the pinyin J-U-E, that's probably as close as we can get in English, 绝. And what it means is to cut off, to terminate, to stop, to cease. So what about the second character? Second character, 圣, is from 圣人. So the first character in 圣人 means divine or sacred. The second character in 圣人, 人, that's a person. You know, a man or woman, or in plural would be people. So this has often been mistranslated. So one mistranslation will translate 圣人 as holy man. Okay, no, 圣人 is not like a holy man. The feeling is definitely off. What it really means is someone with wisdom that approaches the divine. That's where the divine part, 圣, comes in. 人, that's someone. And the wisdom is not specifically stated, but it's implied. So someone, 人, with wisdom that is sacred. Sacred wisdom, divine wisdom, 圣. So in English, we would typically call that person a sage. A person with sage wisdom. All right, so putting the two together to cut off, to terminate, to stop divinity, the divine, the sacred wisdom? Why is that? Is Lao Tzu saying that we need to put an end to divine wisdom or sages? If that's what he's saying, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And by the way, as you are listening to the breakdown, feel free to type in whatever you like, type in what you think it means. So here's how we decipher this particular puzzle, and it's actually quite easy. The key is to realize that this particular chapter continues the thought process from the previous one. In the previous chapter, we talked about how when the Tao is forgotten or abandoned or discarded, then what can happen is the emergence of all kinds of things that simulate the attributes of the Tao, but are contrived and forced. So that's what we're talking about here. So let me get more specific. The idea is simple. When the Tao is present, we have true wisdom, which is natural and unforced. So this is the wisdom that everyone can tap into. It's natural. It's always been there. It hasn't been twisted by human beings in that form. True wisdom. Natural wisdom would be another way to describe it. But when the Tao is forgotten, we end up with contrived wisdom when people try to project the appearance of a sage. So no longer true wisdom, no longer natural. Now it's much more artificial. Now it's much more pretentious and fake. So that contrived wisdom is what we're trying to put a stop to. So where it says 绝圣, it means to put a stop to this kind of contrived wisdom when people try to project the appearance of a sage. Then once you understand that, the next part in the first line, abandon knowledge, it falls into place. It becomes easy to understand. Understanding the first half makes the second half fall into place. like a piece of jigsaw puzzle. So just like we should end or stop contrived wisdom, when the Tao is forgotten, what should be abandoned also is the appearance, the projection of looking knowledgeable, the appearance of knowledge, because that's mostly egocentric. That's mostly someone trying to showcase himself or herself as being knowledgeable, as to gain power over other people. So that we don't want. And if we can do without this kind of fake wisdom and knowledge and intelligence, then people will benefit. Everyone will benefit from that. And that's actually the next line. So a little more on the abandoned knowledge, and then we'll get to line 2. I don't want to leave this behind without providing some examples, because I believe this is very applicable in our world today. It's not just ancient times. So as we look around, especially now, here's something that I come across every now and then. Students and even teachers of the Tao who are so fixated on minutia or academic trivia that they forget the whole purpose of learning about the Tao is to draw these transformational life lessons. And that's really the more important thing. But instead, the students and teachers who are fixated on minutia, they tend to argue quite a bit about this or that character, how a particular character meant something different in a particular dynasty, and then citing very obscure work to argue a particular point, really missing the greater point of, listen, we're here to improve our lives, to improve ourselves. Exactly. So Francis, I think you've got your finger right on it. You are absolutely correct. You are on track with the interpretation. That's the classical interpretation from 2,500 years ago. That's exactly right. All right, so moving on. What's another example of this fake kind of wisdom or knowledge or intelligence? Well, I have seen this example in media, a hyped up intellectual prodigy, who, again, from egocentric reasons, really loves that label of being an intellectual prodigy, and basically doing everything he can to push that image. And the way he typically does this is with the way he talks. And he speaks rapidly, just rapid fire, word salad, just like a machine gun with his arguments. And he's speaking not just rapidly, but also very aggressively to push his point of view. Now, of course, there's a lot of people who can't really tell that he's actually full of it, but he definitely has become very popular among the people who loves his message, and then will basically put him on a pedestal regarding him as an intellectual leader. Well, nothing is further from the truth. This is an example of the kind of fake wisdom, intelligence that Lao Tzu is talking about. And yet another example, especially from modern times, from recent events, we can see this. We see this quite often. Someone who pretends to be fair and balanced, but then uses tricks, debating tricks, dishonesty, in intellectually dishonest tricks like false equivalence, i.e. both sides are at fault, to obscure an unequal reality. So reality can be quite lopsided, but then you say something like, oh, well, both sides have problems. I mean, that's always true, no matter what you're talking about. So it's just a trick to obscure the truth. All right, so just 3 examples of this modern manifestation of the lack of Tao in our world, where wisdom, knowledge, and intelligence can all be faked. So I'm going to advance to the next slide and then call for a break. In the next slide, we're going to talk about line 2, about the people, how the people benefit 100 times. Okay, so back to the slide. We're on line 2, the people benefit 100 times. So in the original Chinese, we've got 民利百倍. So in Pinyin, 民, the first character, that means people. Li, the second character, means benefit. Bai, third character, means 100. Bei means times. So let me show you the literal meaning there. People benefit 100 times. So if you compare the literal transcription here to the translation, they're almost identical. I'm just adding the in front of it. The people benefit 100 times. So here, I think this is easy to figure out. When we say 100 times here in Mandarin, it just means many times. So that's no different from English. In English, you could say, hey, I told you once, I told you 100 times. When you say that, you don't need literally 100 times, with a precise count. You just mean that you've told that person many times. So 100 times is speaking not literally. So the reason why the people benefit so greatly 100 times is because the contrived appearance of wisdom and intelligence can be quite harmful. The people that cannot see through it will be misled with distortions and untruths. So we see that in our world too. We've got, people who listen, who follow the wrong crowd. We see conspiracy theorists who have a following, and those who do follow this false wisdom, false intelligence, false knowledge, oftentimes live in a bubble and cannot tell that what they think is true is actually quite the reverse when you are outside that bubble. So I think it's easy to see the negative impact of people being misled is why stopping this sort of nonsense is a great benefit. So I don't think that requires any additional explanation. I think that just makes sense on its own. So we can move on. Line 3, and benevolence, abandon righteousness. Let's analyze that. So by leveraging the previous 2 lines, we can understand the rest of this chapter. So here it becomes obvious that 人, that's the second character here, and 义, that's the last character there. So translated as benevolence and righteousness, so seemingly virtues, but these are the forced, pretentious virtues that emerge when the Tao is forgotten. And those of you who went through chapter 18 with me, you probably recall that the second line, line 2 of that chapter, is talking about exactly this, and using the same characters, 仁义. And that's how we know we're on the right track. So in our world, we definitely see, just like, we have seen the discourse in our society being filled with misinformation, being filled with agendas. It's exactly like that in the other aspects of our existence, when we see a spiritual leadership that claims to be moral and righteous, but are actually not. And we know that because we see the news almost on a regular basis that such people point to others as sinners, as people to condemn. So in condemnation, but then sometime after that, they themselves are caught doing the exact same things that they used to condemn. So we see that, so many times now that it's almost to be expected. But then I look at it and then I say that, well, Lao Tzu is right. It is as if he could see our world from 2,500 years ago. It is almost like he can look into the future and see the way the world will become. So in studying the Tao, it often seems like Lao Tzu is speaking across centuries to address us specifically. Now, how did he do that? Well, he doesn't really have any powers to see into the future, make prophecies. He seems to do that because he's addressing human nature. And human nature hasn't changed a whole lot in the last 2,500 years. Let's go to line 4. The people return to piety and charity. So again, this is similar to the message from 18, that if you are able to not have the fake stuff, the pretend benevolence and righteousness, then people have a chance to go back to the natural goodness that was already in them. So here's the question. What if we can stop the false benevolence and righteousness, eliminate the rules and dogma, and free people to just be themselves? So is that a good idea or bad idea? Now, some might say that, well, if you just let the people be themselves, if they're unsupervised, uncontrolled, then you're just inviting problems. It's going to be, there's going to be a great deal of difficulty, and people will do whatever they want, without spiritual leadership. They're just going to be murdering everybody and committing sins left and right, etc. So Lao Tzu is actually not someone who believes that people are inherently wild and uncontrolled and evil and malicious. Quite the opposite. Lao Tzu had the conception of people as essentially good, as basically good. So here's how I will present his point. Lao Tzu suggests everyone has a natural capacity for true piety and charity, that people are basically good and decent and naturally want to be helpful. So this actually has a lot of support now from science. There are experiments conducted on infants, newborns, young children, and there's basically, so in one particular kind of experiment, there's a video camera that's trained in a room, that's a hidden camera in a room, and there's an adult interacting with a very young child. So the adult is in cahoots with the experimenters, and he's following a script. So after some time spent in interaction, making friends with a young child, the adult who is on crutches will attempt to stand and walk, but then will falter and fall to the ground or perhaps the sofa. And as the adult is falling down, video camera records the young child frantically rushing forward to help, to be of assistance in whatever way he can, even though the young child is way smaller than the adult and cannot possibly can't possibly have enough strength to break the adult's fall. So repeatable experiments like that over and over again show that human beings have a natural altruistic side, that when you see someone in trouble, your instinct is to rush forward like a little kid, like a young child, to help. So I believe Lao Tzu was right. So that being the case, Lao Tzu is pointing out that we have a dichotomy here. We have two sides. We have, on the one hand, one side of the dichotomy is being good because you're told that you must be good. And on the other side is the Tao, the natural side, being good just because you want to be good. Why do you want to be good? Well, it's the right thing to do and it makes you feel great. So, of course, you want to be good. Why wouldn't you want to be good, etc.? So, when you come right down to it, Lao Tzu says human beings are more likely to be good than not. Therefore, what Lao Tzu is also suggesting is that rather than trying to control people, why don't we just let people be in touch with the natural goodness that is in them? Then there's not a whole lot that you need to do to have goodness in the world, and it can all come about naturally, not because you order people to be good, not because you command people to be good. What good will that do is the question. Okay, so that's line 4. Let's move on. So next, 5 and 6, relatively easy. And again, we can draw from our understanding of chapter 18, the previous chapter. In this line meaning line number 5, and cunning, discard profit, we see another simple correspondence with Dao De Jing, chapter 18. Part of what it talks about is the deceptive use of intelligence. So hopefully everyone still remembers that part. So the cunning here is that kind of intelligence, the cunning used to trick people. Here, cunning is used to increase one's own profits at another person's expense through theft or robbery. So here, theft and robbery are meant to be general statements depicting all kinds of unlawful, illegal, unethical, immoral activities. So it could be fraud, not theft like pickpocket, but like scams to trick people out of their money, which would be a crime as well. Okay, so that's line 5. Let's take a look at line 6. Bandits and thieves no longer exist. So here's what it's saying. If we can put a stop to the negative use of intelligence, and that's cunning, and unrestrained greed, that's the profit part of line 5, then as a natural consequence, we stop people from committing a crime to get what they want. And it isn't that you force them to stop, it's that they naturally have no reason to commit a crime. Okay, so we're making excellent progress. Let's do line 7. So line 7 says, these 3 things are superficial and insufficient. So what are the 3 things? Looking back at the previous lines, the first thing was 慎智, the what it meant was the contrived appearance of wisdom and knowledge. So wisdom associated with this part, 圣, originally means divine or sacred. Here it means wisdom that approaches the divine, sacred wisdom. 智, this is intelligence, knowledge. So here in this context, it's all about the trying to look smart, contrived appearance of wisdom and knowledge. And we definitely have a lot of people in our world that would like to look really smart. So that's one. That's one of the three. Here's the second one. 仁义. So again, exactly the same characters as was used in chapter 18 of the Tao Te Ching. So just like 圣智 is the contrived appearance of wisdom and knowledge, 仁义 is the forced display of benevolence and righteousness. That's where people are told they must be good, they must be kind, they must do the right thing. So they're doing it because they're being forced to do so. And then number 3, 巧利. This represents the undeserved profits acquired by hook or by crook. So when we talked about the theft or robbery, so these are the 3 things. So these 3 things are what was covered from lines 1 to 6. So Lao Tzu is saying that these 3 things are superficial and insufficient. They're superficial because of what is lacking. They're lacking authentic wisdom, knowledge, benevolence, righteousness. They're also lacking profits acquired through the Tao that supports everyone. So profits that are acquired in ways contrary to the Tao are profits that benefit the self at the expense of others. Profits that are acquired in a consistent manner with the Tao is something that, like a river flowing across the land, benefits everything, everyone and everything that comes into contact with it. It's the ultimate win-win scenario. So these are the 3 things that generate a superficial appearance of good. So for instance, you would initially think that a particular professor with academic, background, well respected, must be teaching something useful or something that's true. But then in our world, you can spend some time listening to that, and it's possible that you would discover that this particular academic is actually full of it. So contrived appearance. So initially on the surface, appearing to be good, just like 仁义, the second one, initially appearing to be a very positive thing. Someone who's very virtuous, religious perhaps, and virtuous because of the religion. But then you may discover that this person is actually two-faced. That is, they present a face of piety to the church congregation, but then privately, it's quite another matter. Not someone who lives up to the teachings of that church. So the display of benevolence superficially appears to be good, but it's actually not a very good thing at all. And the wealth that you acquired through means that are not consistent with the Tao, initially, it seems like you're enjoying the good life. But the reality is you've incurred some negative karmic obligations that will catch up with you as you continue forward. So these are not great. These are things that only look good but are not actually good. Just wanted to make sure that's clear. All right, so what Lao Tzu has to do is to come up with some advice as to how we can live in the Tao and be protected from these things. So the world is full of these manifestations that result from the loss of the great Tao. There are 3 things that we can encounter that match the 3 things that you saw in the previous slide. The pretentious wisdom, intelligence, and knowledge, well, it means that we can be fooled by lies and half-truths. And the forced virtue of benevolence and righteousness, well, we can end up with hypocrites as our spiritual leaders. That is, people who say one thing but cannot practice what they preach. Number 3, we can get ripped off. So by outright theft, robbery, or by unscrupulous merchants who are quote-unquote stealing from customers while appearing to give them a steal of a deal. So how can we watch out for that? How can we guard against numbers 1, 2, and 3? Well, Lao Tzu has a teaching that he can offer to all of us. It is, however, not a prescription to cure the world of its problems. In other chapters of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu would sometimes have advice for the king or the ruler or the emperor. So that can have a wider impact. In this particular case, it's not something that's directed at a ruler to affect the entire kingdom. It is an advice for you, for me, for the individual, for everyone, and the advice is meant to help us navigate through the challenges in life. So he's going to talk about how to avoid being fooled, ending up with hypocrites as spiritual leaders and getting ripped off. That's basically what that says. Let's continue. So this is gonna take us close to the end of the chapter, which means that we will have gone over each line by line, and that's not bad. It's very good progress. It also means that this is a pretty short chapter, so that's how we can do this. But there's a lot that's packed into the last 2 lines. The last 2 lines contain the advice that Lao Tzu has for everybody. And we can, so take a look at lines 9 and 10. You can see that we have a total of 8 characters, 8 Chinese characters here. When you have 8 characters like this, number 1, you can break it down to 2 lines of 4, but within the line of 4 characters, you can also have it again. You can break it down again so that it's 2 parts of 2 characters each. And that's how we analyze this. Okay, starting with 见素, the first 2 characters of line 9. Here's the pinyin, 见素. So the pinyin is pretty close and should be a good guide for people who want to sound these out. So what does it mean? 见 is show, and su is plainness. Su is like unbleached silk, so it's plain. Now, 见, I say show, but if you are a native speaker of Chinese, then you know that the typical way you use 见 is to watch or to see. So here's the explanation on that. In modern Mandarin, people would assume this means see plainness, look at plainness, watch plainness. But that's not what it means here. Why not? Because in ancient times, 见, this character, is often used to mean to show, which means to be seen, like the passive tense, to be seen rather than to see. And that's what it means here. It doesn't mean to see plainness. It means to show plainness. And what does it mean to show plainness? Well, here's what it means. Showing plainness means demonstrating a simple and plain approach in every aspect of life. This actually has a lot of implications that I would like to explore with you. So let's talk about the way people dress. In attire, showing plainness, it doesn't mean that you can get away with no personal grooming. That's not what it means. What it means is making no special effort to be flashy or drastically different from other people in order to draw attention. So let me talk about the different ways that people fail at this. And usually it's because of a need for attention, because the ego craves attention. So for instance, I have seen people who, attend a meeting like this physically while dressed in traditional ancient style garb, like robes. They perhaps will, go through quite a bit of trouble to find something that matches sort of like a martial artist kung fu outfit, and then they will wear that and they will come in to study the Tao. Well, that's not really necessary, and it's being drastically different from the other people in order to draw attention. So what it says about them, the people that do this, is that they want to advertise to the world what they're into, which happens to be the Tao. And experience also shows that this infatuation with the Tao is short-lived, that they will get involved, for some time, and then after a moment, after a while, when they see no particular interesting, quote-unquote, powerful results from listening to Tao teachings, then they will drop it. They will go to the next thing. They will follow the next fad. So that's contrary to the Tao. They don't really stick around long enough to experience the powerful effect that practicing the Tao or cultivating Tao can have on your life. So other manifestations. So I will probably offend quite a few people when I say this, but when people have these tattoos or body piercings that they have devoted considerable effort into in order to project a different appearance, they are just very eager, indeed desperate, to show the world how different they are from others. And that again, that desperation smacks of a need for attention. That again is an ego manifestation. So I won't talk too much about it so that I don't end up offending even more people. But now you get the idea. So to project the plain appearance is to be neat, to be clean, well-groomed, but without flashy clothes, things that are designed to attract attention. It doesn't have to be like very expensive clothes. It could be clothes that you intentionally rip in places to, again, draw attention to yourself. So the Tao standard, by the way, is to be able to fit into any environment and not draw special attention. And that means to dress pretty much like other people dress, nothing special, and to and in terms of interactions, not standing out, intentionally standing out, making an effort to be dramatic, to be different, to yell out different things. Again, those might be attempts to draw attention to yourself. So I would like to actually invite everyone who's listening to look at yourself in that light and ask the question, am I desperate for attention? All right, moving on. So what about in conversation? Well, in conversation, to show plainness means to be plain spoken. And that also means making no effort to show off your knowledge with a fancy vocabulary or uncommon terms. And this is a relatively easy way to see if someone has a problem with his or her ego. If they like to talk in that specific way, if they like to use a lot of terms, maybe some name dropping here and there, then it's a pretty sure sign that they are not showing plainness or demonstrating the principle of simplicity. And now we come to pu. This pu, this is the character for pu, pu, which is the Tao concept of simplicity and plainness. So in the Tao Te Ching, the character pu appears 8 times. So it's an important concept that has reiterated itself 8 times in the Tao Te Ching. In chapter 19, this is actually the second appearance of pu. The first appearance was back in chapter 15. That was when it first showed up. So pu is important, and it's about simplicity and plainness. Let's talk about that. First, the original derivation of pu, that was from the meaning of the character when used as a noun, pu. It meant originally a plain piece of wood. That's what it meant. Now, when that whole concept came into the West, back in the 60s, this plain piece of wood was distorted into the uncarved block. And I'm sure that everyone who's listening, you probably have had exposure or chances to see this term. You've come across this term, the uncarved block, as a way to talk about pu, simplicity and plainness. So the uncarved block is actually a bad translation for pu. The term caught on, but it's not quite right. Why not? Because the uncarved block has been shaped into a block to be carved, which means a block of wood has already been worked on. So a block of wood, even if uncarved, is not the same as a plain piece of wood. So the pu concept is like a plain piece of wood you may find in a forest that has never been touched by human hands. So the concept means the original, most natural state of being. In the most natural state, you have the potential of becoming many different things. All the possibilities are wide open for you. So as a person starting out on a path, any path for any journey, at the starting point, you have the potential to take any direction, any possible path to whatever destination you intend. So the starting point, the beginning, is the maximum potentiality and maximum possibilities. So to hold pu in the Mandarin, bao pu, that's the last two characters of line 9, it's to hold simplicity. To hold pu is to embrace your original, most natural state, free from the influence of the material world. It's the state of your highest potentiality and your greatest possibilities. And that's it's a central teaching in the Tao to hold simplicity and let that be manifested in every aspect of life. That manifestation is far from easy. So in that state, the state of your highest potentiality, you are in touch with the natural wisdom, intelligence, and benevolence of the Tao. Therefore, virtues flow from you naturally. So that's why you want to hold simplicity, because it's the opposite of what happens when the Tao is forgotten or abandoned, and then all the fakeness comes into being. When you're back in touch with the Tao, when you're in touch with your highest potentiality of Pu, you are at your most authentic. You are at your most natural, powerful, and authentic. All right, so let's tackle this particular topic. Here, I want to be practical. I want to address real life, how we can apply these principles in everyday living. So, 见速报朴, how do we do that? Well, definitely one way to do it, and a very important practice, is to declutter your space. And what I mean by that is living space, working space, your space, period. In recent years, it has been, there's a resurgence in popularity for being a minimalism, or to declutter, to organize, and to let go. So a famous organizer who has recently become well known in the West is Marie Kondo. She's a Japanese organizing expert who has made it big in Japan as well as the rest of the world, and now in the West as well. She has a show that basically it's like a reality show teaching people how to declutter. The teaching from Marie Kondo is actually simple. Not easy to do, but simple in concept. So one central concept is that, would you like to live a life that is full of joy? If so, one way you can do it is by surrounding yourself with only the things that spark joy in your heart. For everything else that doesn't have that effect on you, they don't spark joy at all, you let them go. You thank them. These other things that don't spark joy, you thank them for many years of service, and then you donate them, give them away, discard them. If you follow that process, you know that at the end of it, if you really follow that process, at the end of it, the only things left in your life are the things you absolutely need, or the things that spark joy. When you see something, maybe it's clothing. When you see something to wear and you look at it, if it's something that fits well and you feel fantastic when you put it on, well, it sparks joy. You're keeping it. That's not to be thrown away. But then there's something else, from years and years ago that you're not quite sure what fits you anymore, number one. And number two, it's sort of like, okay, it's not something that you love. It's something that would be acceptable, Well, that Marie Kondo would advise is something that you should let go. That's something that you should discard. Now you may say, but it's still so new. It's hardly ever been used. and it's really expensive. Well, that doesn't really matter. In the method, the idea is that you want to end up in a situation where in every direction of your living space that you can possibly look, wherever you turn your gaze, you are looking at something that you love. So when that happens, you cannot help but have a wonderful life, a life that's full of joy in every direction that you happen to look at. And when people follow this process to reach that end state, they make a lot of discoveries. Usually, as they are following that process, they discover a lot of things that they forget they had. Things that are just like wonderful discoveries, oh, this is a gift from so and so. I forgot that I had it, and it brings back a lot of joy. And it's to be kept because it does that for you, because it brings joy. Now, I've painted you a pretty rosy picture of this process. This is congruent with the Tao process to show plainness and to embrace simplicity, is to let go, to declutter of the things you don't need. It's congruent with the Tao. But I have to tell you, the Marie Kondo method has also encountered a lot of resistance and pushback. So let me give you an example from my personal life. So I know a bunch of authors, having been published myself. I know authors as well as their fans. So these authors and their fans, there's one thing that they have in common, and that is they're all book lovers. So when one of them shows a picture that looks like this is the library that this person has set up at home. His personal library. He's got comfortable couches in there. He's got everything that he could possibly need. And when he's in there, he's surrounded by books. These books spark joy. So you might say, well, he's living in accordance with Marie Kondo's teachings, right? Yeah, that's true. These are all books that spark joy for him. But then if I were to look a little bit deeper, probably it's not all the books that spark joy. In this particular reader, there's probably just a handful of books that really spark joy. And the rest of it, he still wants to hang on to because he loves books. He loves being surrounded by books. He loves the way that books feel in his hands. He loves the way they smell. So he doesn't want to be without it. Even the books that he doesn't particularly care for, he wants to have those books on his shelves. So that particular group, the readers and the authors, they actually dislike the Marie Kondo organizing approach very much. So they look at a picture like this, and then they say, that looks like paradise. That looks like heaven to me. Whereas I myself look at it, and then I think, too much visual clutter. Now, when I look at something that's organized by someone like Marie Kondo, it's very Spartan. There's hardly anything there. I think, wow, that is a space where I can relax. But the readers, the authors, they will look at that and then they will say, that looks completely sterile. It doesn't look like there's anyone who lives there. It doesn't look cozy. It doesn't look like it's for human beings. They want a place looking more like this picture. But then, someplace like this, well, it's got to be, let me point out, it's got to be kept up. It has to be cleaned. It's got to be dusted. Or the volumes become very, very dusty. They gather quite a bit of dust. And not only that, but with this many books, there are bound to be a large percentage of them that you have not read or have forgotten or don't particularly enjoy very much that you keep around because you think you should read it one day. So all of that, to me, is not congruent with the Tao. What would be? Well, I never say anything to that group about what I personally do because they didn't ask me. If they were to ask, if they were to say, Derek, if this is not paradise or heaven to you, then what is? Well, I would say it would be something like this. It would be something to read that contains all of these physical books within itself. So a tiny thing that contains volumes that I can take everywhere. I think that's way better than physical books because of the convenience. With this particular picture, there's also glasses. Okay, I'm gonna need that. There's coffee. Okay, I enjoy that. So that sparks joy in me, especially in an afternoon. I need a cup of joe to pick me up. I probably wouldn't have the pen and notepad though. I will probably have some kind of laptop to further simplify. So that, to me, the bottom picture is a lot closer to paradise or heaven from that Tao-oriented perspective of living minimally. Whereas the top part is seen by many as heaven, as something that sparks joy. But I would say that's only one level of this whole idea. With the Tao, you're constantly being challenged to go even further, to simplify even more, to let go even more. And it extends not only to your physical space, but also to your mental space or your mind. So declutter your mind is another important practice in the Tao. So what do I mean by declutter your mind? Well, we can start with a question. The question is this. This question is for everyone. What would be the most essential television for you to watch? What would you make sure that you watch every day or every week when the program comes on, that you set aside time for that you never miss it, that will be something that's essential, that you need, that sparks joy in you. So I'm curious to learn about what you would regard as essential television, and I'll pause for a moment while you answer that. And in the meantime, I would like to share with you that if I were to answer this question, it's actually nothing. That is, I fell out of the habit of watching television quite some time ago. So there's actually no essential television for me anymore. I'm not suggesting that everybody should stop watching television, just like the bottom picture here, this is what I do. I'm just sharing with you my own personal experience with decluttering. Perhaps once upon a time, I would have thought of this library as a really good idea. Now I see less is more. So I'm sort of an extreme case. You don't necessarily need to do everything I do, but I definitely want you to want to get you to think in directions that perhaps you are not used to. So, and so Francis, speaking of that particular show, I followed it to season 4, and then I dropped off. So I understand that the grand finale is coming up real soon. I think everyone's looking forward to the showdown. And best of all, it's not in the books, so it'll be something that's completely unexpected. People won't be able to come into it thinking that, well, I've read all the books, so I know what's going to happen. So I think you have a treat. So Maria, like yourself, I also have stopped watching television. I definitely turn to the internet for something that I choose specifically, just like you. And yes, indeed, because I make that choice to watch a particular thing because it answers a particular interest or a particular question. And that can change all the time. So I find that my approach is very similar to yours. So anyhow, this question about the essential television is just to get the mental gears to start turning. It's not the only decluttering that we can do. There's more. Here's another suggestion. Be as selective about your associations, i.e. your friends, as your belongings. Do they spark joy? Are they essential? Do you really need to Kvetch? And what's Kvetch? That's Yiddish. It means to complain. It's what happens when I see a lot of people gather together. It's basically yet another Kvetch session where people take turns talking about what they don't like about their lives. So, and I know that when I used to call people up, I end up having a Kvetch conversation with them over the phone where they'll tell me what they are constantly not happy about. And when it's my turn, I'll complain about the things that are happening in my life. So a mutual Kvetch. So do we really need that? Well, my answer is that I really don't. All the kvetching that I have done in the past have lead to exactly zero change. Things don't change when I complain about them. They do change when I actually do something about them, and that is making plans to do something about it and then follow through with those plans. So, is it possible for you to declutter your associations? I think it is. I think I want to suggest the possibility of the idea for you. Keep everything for yourself to be the best like you deserve. Your best friends, associates, rather than those who just suck up your energy like a mental vampire. So declutter your mind, declutter your space. These are just a couple of things to declutter. I'm sure as you begin in this process, you will most likely think of more. So moving on. We are now at the last line. So I'll get through this and then do the paraphrase next time and perhaps examples and illustration. So 少私, this is about reduce selfishness. So the suggestion from Lao Tzu is to turn the focus of your thinking from yourself to other people. I usually, years ago, decades ago, I operated on WIFM, which is WIIFM, what's in it for me? That's how I used to think. But now the thought process becomes not what's in it for me. I think about how can everyone benefit from it, from this. And this is actually the secret of the joyous life. The reason why I say it's a secret is because the meaning of life is not about doing what pleases me. Rather, it's about being of service, being a positive influence in helping people transform their lives with the Tao. So you may wonder, well, how did I find the time to create these elaborate presentations? Well, it's because of this. It's because this is what brings joy for me, and I hope for you as well. I have some examples to illustrate this that will have to wait until next time. So our time is almost up. And so I want to move to the summary for today. So here we go. Let's do this one at a time. Summary for today. You have seen that in our world, in the beginning of this chapter, we have seen that there are those who pretend to be wise, the self-proclaimed intellectuals. So the way that we would deal with that as Tao cultivators is to live in the Tao in order to discover the truth for ourselves. And there's great truth from daily life rather than these false teachers who pretend to be wise, pretend to have knowledge. Then there are also those who pretend to be righteous. The way we deal with that as cultivators of the Tao is to be guided by our conscience and the teachings of the ancient sages, and not the spiritual frauds. You know, these spiritual frauds, you never know. They may show up in the news one day doing the exact same things that they have warned everyone against. So that's happening way too many times. Rather than to depend on them, I would say depend on your master within, the wise master that lives in your heart or your conscience. So lastly, we have this factor. So I think you should recognize all of these from the discussion we just had. This is number 3. There are many distractions and temptations in the material world. So to deal with that, in this summary, I want to suggest that here's what we do. We practice simplicity and plainness, and naturally minimize desires while maximizing the joy of life. So we were able to talk about simplicity and plainness a little bit. I still want to give some examples on that. And I also want to talk about minimizing desires and maximizing the joy of life. That's going to have to wait until next time. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.